Colour of Magic and The Light Fantastic told a perfect, original tale that paid homage to every aspect of fantasy fiction going. The Discworld likely could have ended there, but appeared that the author had more to say. He could have critiqued so many things he both loved and found derivative about the genre, except one thing. The only woman of real note in either of the previous books who underwent any form of character development had been a sacrificial virgin, one whose story moved her from annoyance that she had been diverted from her life plan to becoming the consort of the most dangerous man on the disc. However, Pratchett, perhaps critically aware of this criticism, with a teenage daughter keen on a literary career herself in the house, must have been aware of this as he set about resolving the issue. In 1985, he gave a speech about why Gandalf never married, in which he unpicked the implicit, often unspoken, but almost universal concept in Western fantasy that female magic is somehow cheap and nasty. There was a lot to say on this subject, there still is today, and though he opined that this topic would probably not be settled soon, it was apparent his next fantasy tome would address the subject properly. So for his third book in the series, he cast out the protagonists, Rincewind and Twoflower, so out went the rambling aimlessness of the story structure. If he was going to address this imbalance, then he was going to do it properly. He had introduced a world of wizards and heroes. It only made sense for it to be expanded to include women as well. Now, I'm not alone in being a big fan of Pratchett. For me, that love has existed since I was 13 years old, and one of my best friends introduced his books to me in the school library. He devoured and raved about them, probably not appreciating the subtext beneath the books, just loving the imagery and the fantastical nature of them. Now that was definitely true for me. The school had a graphic novel of The Colour of Magic and a paperback copy of Equal Rites, and though I tried both of them, only one made a lasting impression on me. I was young and foolish, or perhaps I was just being male, looking at the world through a male gaze. Perhaps the book was designed specifically to criticise me, as when I came back to it just 5 years later, I realised it was far and away the better book. Equal Rites offers a lot more meat than either of its predecessors, although that mostly comes from the form of Granny Weatherwax. Having criticised Rincewind for being a passive protagonist, in that he does not drive the story forwards in his actions, but just responds as comes naturally to the world around him, mainly by fleeing, Granny Weatherwax is the perfect tonic. She's not a woman who starts things, but she is the one who will end them. And when she ends things, she ends them properly. Much of the opening portion of the book relies on Granny Weatherwax acting as a mentor to Esk, and there's a nice parallel between Granny Weatherwax and Merlin, as both teach their protégés using animals, creating a close dynamic between teacher and pupil. However, Pratchett does something awkward here. His thesis on the subject of equal rights in fantasy, as outlined in his original speech in 1985, appears to be that there is exclusion because of gender and identity, and he's incredibly critical of this when it's presented. But there is also a difference between practicality and theatrics. Wizards, as popularised in fiction, he imagines almost as flights of fancy, the medieval equivalent of a comic book superhero. Before there was Superman and Batman, there was Merlin. Witch magic, on the other hand, he historically associates with the interest that women have in looking after other women's health. It's an earthy, practical, very real subject. Witches, Pratchett seems to value especially, are better because they actually do some good in the world, whereas wizards, on the other hand, just sit in their university, thinking and not doing very much of anything at all. However, when necessity calls, both can do magic, and there is a grudging respect between Weatherwax and Arch-Chancellor after they duel, so the jury's still out on that count. But by giving us a selection of main characters who actually respond and get involved with the story, as opposed to just passing through it, Pratchett gets to explore some far more interesting narrative terrains. Although the ending boils down to roughly the same conclusion as The Light Fantastic, we have a sense perhaps that Terry Pratchett still does not care very much about the meta-plot as he does the characters. I always felt it was a shame that Esk, the Discworld's first female wizard, never really properly appeared again, getting even less recognition or cameo callbacks than Rincewind. She was always destined to be overshadowed by her mentor though, who was a striking figure. Esk drives the story forward by acting in a particularly stubborn, blunt method, where she always speaks clearly and articulates what she wants, despite any opposition in her way. But Weatherwax's attempts to guide the Wonder Child on her journey are what make this story. In a delicious irony, when the Discworld books were republished in the late 2010s, the publisher decided that the cluttered artwork from Josh Kirby was detracting the books from getting new readers. The art was iconic, it had good ideas, but there was simply too much going on in them, so they made the decision to clean them up and focus just on the key aspects to draw the reader's eyes. I can sympathise. Secretly, I think that the cluttered artwork was one of the things scaring me off Pratchett for my teenage years. They were intimidating. However, whilst most of the other books re-release did competent jobs focusing the eye on a single concept from the cover, the redesign for Equal Rites relegated the book's protagonists to the back of the spine. The entire composition was altered to put two dueling wizards on the cover, and one of them a badly photoshopped edit of a minor character at that. With Mr. Pratchett dead, it took intervention from his fans and his daughter to inquire exactly what the publisher was thinking to get this travesty corrected. If nothing else, it proves that even 40 years later, this book still has something important to say about gender representation in fantasy. That even if we are better at putting a diverse cast in our fiction, our marketing teams have some way to go before they have a chance of catching up. As for the book itself, short, sweet, just the right length to engage and amuse without ever overstaying its welcome. This was the perfect, mature response to the anarchy of the first two novels.